At first, they thought it was sabotage, then they realized the graves were moving on their own. In a quiet rural town at the end of the 19th century, surrounded by vast open fields, fog-covered hills, and narrow dirt roads that seemed to disappear into the horizon, there stood a small cemetery beside an aging stone church. It was a place where funerals were simple, where families believed that once someone was buried, they would remain there forever, undisturbed, peaceful, watched over by faith and memory. Yet one winter, something began to happen in that cemetery, something subtle. At first, something people tried to dismiss until it grew too strange to ignore. Families visiting their loved ones began to notice changes that seemed impossible. A headstone that once stood perfectly straight now leaned slightly to the left. Another that had always been near the church wall now appeared closer to the path. Distances felt wrong, alignments no longer matched old photographs or memory. People argued with themselves, convincing their minds that grief could distort perception, that perhaps they had simply remembered things incorrectly. But week after week, the changes became more obvious and more disturbing. Entire rows of graves appeared to have shifted position overnight, not dramatically, not in a way that screamed movement, but just enough that everyone could tell something was different. The stones were still embedded firmly into the soil, the ground was compact, untouched, not a single sign of digging, no displaced dirt, no footprints, nothing to suggest human interference, and yet, the graves were not where they had been before, as if the land itself had quietly rearranged the dead. Concern spread through the town, and eventually investigators from neighboring districts were called. They arrived carrying lanterns, notebooks, measuring ropes, and wooden stakes. They documented every grave position, marking lines into the soil, writing down coordinates and angles with meticulous precision. They left the cemetery confident that by morning, they would confirm natural causes, perhaps soil expansion or shifting ground. But when they returned the next day, the stakes no longer aligned with the stones, the measurements failed, and the graves had once again changed position. The earth remained sealed, undisturbed, the grass had not been cut or lifted, roots beneath the surface were still intact. No grave appeared to have been dug up, yet coffins that were recorded in one location were later discovered somewhere else entirely, still sealed, still preserved, showing no signs of exhumation, no scratches, no marks, no evidence of tampering, as if they had somehow relocated within the ground without ever being unearthed. One investigator wrote that the phenomenon felt like trying to measure a shadow. Every time they thought they understood the pattern, it changed again. Families grew fearful. Some stopped visiting the cemetery altogether, others visited more often, desperate to confirm whether their loved ones were still where they had been laid to rest. But each visit seemed to bring more confusion, more questions, more doubt about what was really happening beneath the soil. Residents living near the cemetery began reporting strange sounds late at night, faint echoes beneath the ground, dull knocking, slow dragging noises, something moving where there should only be silence. Some described it as the earth shifting like a deep breath. Others swore they heard whispers carried through the cold air, words they could not understand, voices that sounded like prayers or grieving cries echoing from somewhere beneath their feet. As reports spread beyond the town, rumors began to grow. Travelers shared stories in taverns, newspapers whispered about a cemetery where the dead refused to remain still, church officials feared unrest and spiritual panic. So the local clergy stepped in, urging residents to stop discussing the events publicly. They claimed the disturbances were natural, caused by erosion or weather. Even when the evidence contradicted that explanation, even when families insisted they saw things move that should never move. Researchers who examined the site documented cases where burial plots that had been blessed and sealed were later found empty, with the earth still compact and undisturbed, while the coffins from those graves appeared in entirely different sections of the cemetery, as if they had been transported through the ground without being lifted, without any digging, without any traceable human action. One investigator wrote that the cemetery felt like a map that kept redrawing itself. Some theorists suggested underground water movement, but the terrain remained dry. Others proposed landslides, but there were no fractures, no soil breaks, and the church foundation standing beside the cemetery remained perfectly stable. The environment around the graves did not move, only the graves themselves shifted, as if a selective force acted upon specific burial sites and nothing else. Witness testimonies became increasingly unsettling. a groundskeeper reported that one night, while walking past the cemetery with a lantern, he noticed that the rows of graves appeared longer than before, as if new spaces had opened between stones that had once stood close together. He claimed he felt the ground vibrating softly, pulsing beneath his boots like a heartbeat. He never returned to work after that night. Others said that when fog settled over the cemetery, the stones seemed to drift in the mist, not physically moving but giving the illusion of sliding across the earth, only for their positions to be permanently different when the fog disappeared. Families began marking graves with carvings on nearby trees just to see whether alignment would change, and over time, every mark stopped matching. Eventually, an inquiry board compiled a formal report, but the findings were never shared publicly. The documents were sealed inside the church archives, testimonies were edited, some pages were missing entirely, certain witness accounts were crossed out in ink, and others were rewritten to sound more rational, more acceptable, as if someone had tried to reshape the truth into something easier to dismiss. Unofficial notes that survived described fear among members of the clergy, not fear of scandal, but fear of the cemetery itself. Several priests refused to perform burials there after dusk, some refused to walk through the grounds alone, and one statement claimed that no grave in that cemetery remained in the same place for more than a year, that the entire layout was slowly, constantly shifting across generations. When the archives were reopened decades later, historians discovered only fragments of what had been recorded, scattered observations, contradicting testimonies, and a closing sentence that offered no comfort, no answer, only a quiet warning that read, "Activity unresolved, relocation pattern unknown, further investigation discouraged." Today, the cemetery still exists on the outskirts of that forgotten town, and locals say that if you visit during the early morning hours before the sun fully rises, you may notice something strange. The graves never seem to form the same arrangement twice. Photographs taken on different days never align, and some visitors say that when they stand too long between the stones, they feel the ground shift ever so slightly beneath them, like something beneath the earth is still moving, slowly, patiently, silently. And the families who still bury their dead there say one thing above all: you should never promise someone they will rest in peace. Not in that cemetery, not in that ground, because in that place, nothing truly stays where it was laid to rest. If you stayed with this story until the end, thank you for watching, and if you want more real historical mysteries like this, consider subscribing and leaving a like. It helps the channel grow and keeps these stories alive.